There comes a moment in certain connections where everything changes without a single argument, without dramatic endings, without anyone officially saying goodbye. It happens quietly, almost invisibly. One person simply stops overextending themselves. They stop carrying the emotional weight of two people. And strangely, that silent decision becomes louder than any confrontation ever could. That is what happened here. Someone is falling deeply into the realization of what you truly meant to them. And the reason it's happening now is because of one thing you finally chose to do. You stopped abandoning yourself to keep the connection alive. Read this carefully because this message is not reaching you randomly. Something inside you paused for a reason. Something recognized itself in these words before your mind even had time to explain why. And the truth is this: a person connected to you is struggling internally right now in a way they never expected.
Not because you fought for their attention, not because you demanded answers or forced them to see your worth, but because you quietly removed the access they thought would always be available to them. That shift changed everything. There was a version of you that gave endlessly. You checked in first. You made excuses for their inconsistency. You kept conversations alive even when you felt emotionally exhausted. You waited for replies that came late and accepted half-hearted effort because part of you hoped things would eventually become clearer. But eventually, something inside you grew tired, not bitter, not angry, just aware that loving someone should not require losing yourself. So you changed. Maybe you stopped sending the long messages explaining how you felt. Maybe you stopped being available every single time they disappeared and returned. Maybe you stopped reopening doors they kept walking out of. Or maybe you simply became quieter, more protective of your peace, less willing to chase reassurance. From the outside, it looked small, but emotionally, spiritually, internally, it was massive. Because for the first time, you chose yourself over the cycle. And the person on the other side of this connection felt that shift immediately, even if they couldn't explain it at first. They were used to your consistency, used to your patience, used to knowing you would still be there after the confusion, after the distance, after the silence. Your presence became something they unconsciously treated as permanent, and people often fail to recognize the depth of something when they assume it can never leave. That was the mistake. Not because they didn't care, but because certainty can make people emotionally careless. When someone keeps showing up no matter what, urgency disappears, appreciation weakens, effort fades, until one day the energy changes. You stopped reaching. You stopped trying to convince someone to value what should have been obvious. When you pulled your energy back, they began feeling the absence of what you used to give so freely. At first it felt unfamiliar more than painful. They assumed you were distracted, busy, temporarily distant. They expected things to return to normal, but they didn't. Days passed, then weeks, and slowly realization started settling into places they had avoided looking at before. They began noticing the silence, not just the silence between messages, but the emotional silence left behind by your absence, the missing comfort, the missing attention, the missing feeling of being deeply understood by someone who genuinely cared. And that absence became impossible to ignore. Now your memory appears in unexpected moments, in the middle of ordinary routines, during conversations that feel strangely empty, during quiet nights when distractions no longer work the way they used to. A song reminds them of you. A phrase you used to say suddenly returns to them. A moment they once overlooked now feels painfully important. And slowly what they originally dismissed as temporary distance begins transforming into something much heavier. The realization that they may have lost someone rare, because now they understand something they didn't fully grasp before. You were never simply available. You chose them. You chose to care. You chose to stay emotionally present even when it cost you something internally. And now that your energy is no longer constantly surrounding them, they finally understand the emotional space you once filled in their life. That understanding changes people. At first, it creates confusion, then regret, then longing. Not dramatic longing, quiet longing. the kind that appears when someone realizes too late how deeply another person affected them. And this is the part many people misunderstand about love. Sometimes a person only fully sees your value after you stop trying to prove it. Not because absence manipulates people, but because distance creates reflection, and reflection forces honesty. Now they replay old interactions differently. Moments they once brushed aside suddenly carry emotional weight. They remember how safe they felt talking to you, how calm your presence made them feel, how naturally you understood things they struggled to explain to others, and they compare that feeling to everything else around them now. That comparison is what's changing them. Because connections built on surface attraction fade quickly when distance appears, but soul-deep connections grow louder in silence. And what they're feeling now is not convenience, it's recognition. Recognition of someone who touched parts of them that no one else reached in the same way. The difficult part is that they are also confronting themselves now. Their fears, their avoidance, their emotional patterns, the walls they hid behind while you continued offering openness. Your withdrawal became a mirror, and mirrors force people to see truths they were avoiding. Truths like you loved them sincerely, you showed up consistently, you offered emotional depth they may never have fully appreciated while they had access to it. And now the idea of losing that permanently feels heavier than they expected. But here is the most important part of all this. Your transformation was never meant to be about making them suffer. It was about saving yourself. You were never meant to spend your life proving your worth to someone unwilling to meet you halfway. You were never meant to shrink yourself to keep another person comfortable. And the moment you stopped doing that, you stepped into a different version of yourself, a steadier version, a more grounded version, a version no longer fueled by fear of abandonment. And ironically, that is the version they are beginning to fall deeply in love with now, not because you became distant or unavailable, but because you finally became aligned with your own value. That energy changes everything. People can feel when someone no longer needs external validation to feel whole. They can feel when someone stops begging to be chosen and quietly starts choosing themselves instead. And that shift is magnetic. Now something inside them is waking up slowly, not all at once, not dramatically, but consistently. The fear of losing you completely is beginning to outweigh the fear that kept them emotionally guarded before. And whether they admit it openly or not, your absence has forced them to confront feelings they spent a long time trying not to examine too closely. This doesn't mean you should chase the outcome. It means you should continue honoring the version of yourself you fought so hard to become. Because real love, healthy love, cannot grow where self-abandonment exists. If this connection returns, it must return differently, with honesty, with effort, with emotional responsibility. Otherwise, the old cycle simply repeats itself. And deep down, you already know that now. That's why your energy feels different lately. You are no longer waiting from a place of desperation. You are standing in your own life again. And strangely enough, that is exactly what finally made them realize your true value. What they are feeling now is not sudden. It is the slow unfolding of something they ignored for too long. Because once your absence created space inside their life, that space began filling itself with memories, realizations, and emotions they could no longer push aside. At first, it started quietly. A random thought about you during an ordinary moment. A memory appearing without warning. A conversation with someone else that somehow reminded them of the way you used to listen. And those thoughts stayed longer than they expected. Because now they are not only remembering what you did for them, they are remembering how you made them feel. And there is a difference between those two things. They remember the patience you carried even during difficult moments, the way you listened carefully instead of waiting for your turn to speak, the way you noticed small details other people ignored completely, the way your presence made stressful moments feel lighter without needing attention for it. Back then, those things became familiar to them, almost routine, not because they lacked value, but because your consistency made your care feel permanent. And people often fail to recognize the depth of something they believe will always remain available to them. But now it feels different. Now those same memories carry weight, because when they interact with other people, they notice what is missing. Conversations feel flatter. Connections feel more surface level. Something lacks the emotional depth they once experienced with you naturally. And even if they try not to compare, comparison keeps happening quietly inside them. You continue appearing in contrast, not physically, but emotionally. They begin realizing that what they shared with you was not ordinary comfort. It was rare emotional safety. And once someone experiences that kind of connection, it becomes difficult to ignore its absence later. This is where everything begins changing internally for them. Missing someone is one thing. Understanding their value after they are gone is something entirely different. Now they are beginning to truly understand you. They understand how much emotional effort you gave without making it feel heavy. They understand how consistently you showed up even when your own heart felt tired. They understand how often you chose understanding instead of conflict, patience instead of pride. And with that understanding comes a quiet form of regret. Not dramatic regret, not the kind they openly announce, but the kind that sits heavily in private moments. The kind that appears late at night when distractions fade and honesty becomes unavoidable. They think about times you expressed your feelings clearly and how they minimized them. Times you needed reassurance and didn't fully receive it. Times you offered love openly while they stayed emotionally guarded. And now they can see the imbalance. They can see the gap between what you gave and what they returned. That realization carries emotional weight because they know deep down they could have handled things differently. But at the time they didn't feel urgency. Why would they? You were always there. Your presence felt certain. Uncertainty can make people careless without even realizing it. When someone believes they will always have access to your energy, they stop treating it like something fragile. They stop fearing its loss until suddenly that certainty disappears. Now your energy no longer reaches for them the same way. And for the first time, they feel something unfamiliar inside this connection, uncertainty. They no longer know where they stand with you. They no longer know if they still have the same place in your life. They no longer know whether you would respond the same way if they came back. And uncertainty changes people. It forces reflection. It sharpens attention. It makes emotions impossible to ignore. Before the connection felt predictable, you cared, you stayed, you forgave, you tried. Now they don't know anymore. And because they don't know, they think about you constantly in ways they never did before. They replay conversations searching for meaning they missed at the time. They revisit moments that once seemed small and realize how much emotional truth was hidden inside them. They remember your words differently now because experience has changed their perspective. And the deeper these realizations go, the more emotional the connection becomes for them. Because now this is no longer simply about missing you. It is about understanding your value through your absence. That combination is powerful. Now your name crosses their mind during meaningful moments. When something good happens and they instinctively want to tell you first. When something difficult happens and they realize you would have understood them better than anyone else around them. That is when the realization fully lands. You were never just someone occupying space in their life. You brought depth into it. You brought emotional presence, steadiness, warmth, and understanding in ways they did not fully appreciate while they still had direct access to it. And now they feel the difference. That awareness changes how they see you entirely. Because now, you are no longer emotionally predictable. You are no longer simply there. You have become uncertain. And uncertainty has a strange effect on the human heart. It creates reflection, it creates longing, it creates emotional clarity. Now they watch from a distance in quiet ways, maybe through social media, maybe through mutual spaces, maybe only through memories and imagination. But however it happens, they notice something different about you now. You seem calmer, stronger, more grounded. Not because you are pretending to be unaffected, but because you stopped carrying emotional weight that was never fully yours to hold alone. And that change is visible. Even from far away, they can sense that you are evolving, that your energy no longer revolves around waiting for them, that you are rebuilding yourself quietly and honestly. Part of them admires that growth deeply. Part of them feels pulled toward it. But another part feels something heavier underneath it all. Fear. The fear that you are becoming someone they may no longer have access to. And that fear forces people to confront feelings they spent a long time avoiding. Because nothing reveals the true value of a connection faster than realizing it may not always remain available. That realization is where love often begins becoming real. Not when someone is certain they can keep you, but when they suddenly understand they might lose you. In a shadow, there are moments in life when someone enters your world and suddenly coincidence no longer feels believable. You can replay the timeline 100 different ways, trying to explain how everything unfolded so perfectly. But deep down you already know logic was never the force guiding this connection. This person did not arrive randomly. They entered your life carrying a purpose your soul recognized before your mind could understand it. And from the moment they appeared, something inside you shifted in a way that was silent yet permanent. Even now, while you try to convince yourself to move on, while you attempt to reason your way through the ache and tell yourself the story is finished, some part of you continues turning back toward them. Not from desperation, not from obsession, but from the strange pull of something deeply familiar, something that feels woven into you. If these words found you today, there is a reason for that. Messages meant for the soul arrive at exact moments of readiness. Carl Jung once said, "Who looks outside dreams, who looks inside awakes." And perhaps that is exactly what is happening inside you now. Something long asleep is beginning to wake up. A quiet knowing that refuses to disappear no matter how much time passes. Maybe you feel divided inside yourself. One part wants to let go and finally rest, while another part still believes there is something unfinished here. Silence has a way of creating doubt. Distance can make even the strongest heart question what it once knew with certainty. You may have asked yourself, if you imagined the depth of this connection, if perhaps you projected meaning onto something that was never truly real. But if it were only illusion, it would have faded by now. Illusions collapse under time and distance. This connection did not. It survived silence. It survived confusion. It survived every attempt you made to walk away from it. That is because what you feel is not shallow attachment. It is something quieter and much deeper. Obsession is frantic. It demands attention. It screams. What lives inside you is different. It waits beneath the surface. It rises in still moments, in dreams, in sudden waves of emotion that arrive without warning. It feels less like craving and more like recognition. When you first met them, something ancient stirred awake inside you. It was more than attraction, more than compatibility. It felt like familiarity without explanation, like your soul recognized them before your life did. Even ordinary conversations carried unusual weight. Your body felt both safe and intensely awake around them at the same time, and that combination leaves a mark people do not easily forget. Jung once wrote that the meeting of two personalities is like the contact between two chemical substances. If there is any reaction, both are transformed. That is exactly what happened here. You changed because of this connection, and whether they admit it openly or not, they changed too. Connections that transform us are never casual. They rearrange the inner world. They open emotional doors that cannot simply be closed again. Even through silence and distance, they feel you more than they allow themselves to admit. Some people experience emotion deeply but hide it beneath calm behavior. Silence does not always mean absence of feeling. Sometimes it means the feeling became too overwhelming to manage. Your presence awakened something inside them they were not prepared to face. Instead of leaning toward, they stepped away from it, hoping distance would quiet what you stirred in them. But real emotional recognition does not disappear that easily. In quiet moments when distractions fall away, you return to their thoughts naturally. They replay old conversations. They remember how it felt to be fully understood by you. They compare every shallow interaction to the depth they experienced with you, and that comparison unsettles them. Their distance was never created because they felt nothing. In many ways it existed because they felt too much. There are battles happening inside them that were never yours to carry. Fear of vulnerability, fear of losing control, fear of being truly seen. For some people, love feels dangerous not because of the other person, but because of what love exposes inside them. You became a mirror for parts of themselves they had hidden for years. And rather than facing those hidden parts, they retreated from the reflection. Jung said, until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life and you will call it fate. Right now, they are still being guided by wounds and fears they have not fully confronted. But once something inside a person has been awakened, it cannot return to sleep. You enter their life to remind them what emotional honesty feels like, what tenderness feels like, what genuine connection feels like, and experiences like that do not simply vanish. The universe does not create meaningful encounters without reason. If this connection were truly over, it would have ended cleanly. Instead, it lingers through signs, dreams, memories, and moments where their name suddenly enters your mind without effort. These moments are not asking you to chase them. They're asking you to trust yourself. There is a difference between forcing a door open and trusting that the right door will open naturally when both people are ready. Your exhaustion is understandable. Loving deeply without clarity can feel heavy, but your hope is not weakness. Real intuition is quiet. It does not beg or panic. It simply waits with calm certainty. Something beneath the surface is changing now. Fear is losing some of its control. Resistance is softening. And somewhere inside them, the possibility of losing you completely is beginning to feel heavier than the risk of trying again. This is not necessarily the end of the story. It may simply be the pause before understanding. At the same time, your own transformation matters just as much as theirs. You are not the same person you were before this connection entered your life. Your emotional awareness has deepened. Your standards have changed. You can no longer tolerate shallow love or emotional inconsistency the way you once did. This connection woke you up. Sometimes soul-level encounters do not arrive simply to stay immediately. Sometimes they arrive first to reveal what your heart truly needs. They expose the difference between real intimacy and emotional survival. And once that awakening happens, you cannot return to who you were before. That is why letting go feels so difficult. Not because you are weak, but because this connection revealed a deeper truth about yourself. It showed you how fully you are capable of loving. It showed you your own emotional depth. The mind will still question things. It will ask, if this were real, wouldn't it be easier? But soul connections rarely move in straight lines. They move in spirals, returning people to the same lessons at deeper levels until honesty finally replaces fear. The complication here is not lack of feeling. It is difference in readiness. You became willing to open emotionally. They are still learning how. And readiness cannot be forced onto another person. It must come from their own inner confrontation. There are moments when they almost reach out, moments when your name hovers in their thoughts and they consider sending a message, but fear interrupts them. Fear of saying the wrong thing. Fear of rejection. Fear that too much time has passed. So they stay silent while their emotions continue growing underneath that silence. And still you remain in their mind. Late at night, early in the morning, in conversations that feel empty, in relationships that lack depth. You have quietly become the standard against which they measure emotional connection. At the same time, you are beginning to change your relationship with this connection too. You are learning the difference between attachment and alignment. Attachment says, I need this person in order to feel whole. Alignment says, I am already whole, and what is truly meant for me will meet me honestly. That shift changes everything. When you stop chasing clarity and begin living in your own truth, the pressure starts dissolving. The connection is no longer fed by anxiety. It begins existing in a calmer, healthier energy. And that is the exact state where genuine reunion becomes possible. Because if someone returns while you are abandoning yourself, the old patterns only repeat. But if they return when you are grounded, emotionally steady, and aware of your worth, something entirely different can grow. You are not being punished by the delay. You are being prepared to receive love without losing yourself. Prepared to recognize real effort instead of empty potential. Prepared to stand in your own value regardless of what another person chooses. And they feel this change in you. They sense you pulling your energy inward instead of anxiously reaching outward. They sense you are no longer waiting in the same desperate way. And strangely, That is exactly what makes your absence more powerful. Now the connection is no longer guaranteed. It must be chosen. And choice carries weight. As this process continues, you may notice a new kind of calm forming inside you. Less panic, less urgency, more trust. That is alignment. You are no longer trying to control the outcome. You are allowing truth to reveal itself naturally. The path between you is not blocked forever. It is being cleared of illusions, fears, and old emotional patterns. Whether this story leads to a reunion or release, it is guiding both of you toward deeper honesty. And that honesty is the real purpose behind everything you have experienced. There may come a moment when communication opens again in an unexpected way, a sincere message, a vulnerable conversation, a shift that feels calmer and more real than anything before. If that moment arrives, do not rush it. Let honesty unfold naturally. And if fear rises inside you again, remember this: fear is often memory, not prophecy. You are no longer the same person you were when this journey began. You are clearer now, more grounded in your own worth. You no longer need to prove your value through endless patience or self-sacrifice. Your growth already speaks for itself, and whether they fully meet you there or not, something important has already happened. You returned to yourself. You learned the difference between longing and real alignment. You learned that love should never require you to disappear in order to keep it alive. That lesson alone changed your life forever. Now you stand in a different energy, one built on self-respect, emotional balance, truth, and trust, and love that is truly meant for you will rise to meet you there. Whatever unfolds next will not ask you to shrink yourself. It will ask you to stand fully as you are. And that is where real love finally begins.